the current updated visual for what we have coming in the Neuro Pro 2 unit, hardware-wise and LED placement-wise. Okay, so right out the gate, you are probably noticing up at the top those two colored intranasal applicators. So one of the things that is new that I'm most excited about is we're going to have a double applicator option in the Neuro Pro 2, one in the left nostril and one in the right nostril. And when it comes, the one that goes in the left is going to be blue, and the one that goes in the right is going to be red. Right for red, red for right. That will be easy to remember. When you are using my protocols, or potentially even thinking about making ones for yourself, for some of my designs, it's really quite critical that the left intranasal applicator and the right intranasal applicator are plugged in appropriately, because some of the more subtle features will actually create a little bit of independence and networking between that right nostril and parts of the brain, and between the left nostril and parts of the brain. So right out the gate, pay attention to that. So the other things you can see is, after looking at the top of the diagram, we've got 3 blue squares in the middle, a couple of white and green squares out on the periphery, and then another little pink square down at the bottom. So the pink squares at the top and the single pink square at the bottom, I am potentially combining in some of my protocol designs for intranasal and then base of the head. So if we scroll down to my second image with the lateral view, you can see that the actual placement of that kind of occipital lower base of the skull LED comes right along, almost on plane with those intranasal back into the sinus cavity, potentially hitting right into the bottom of that frontal cortex. So this is what we are thinking about as, and we as in me. So this intranasal, potentially to occipital connection, is what I am considering almost a subcortical coordination circuit, right? And then if you look at the placements on the other LEDs, we've got some right along the midline, these blue ones, and then we've got some more peripherally placed LEDs. Some across the front, some a little bit more in the parietal, and some across that sensory motor central strip. So when we actually look at the naming conventions that you will see show up in the Neuro Pro 2 guide, and you will see show up potentially in your app software, we've got central. So 1 is more towards the front of the head, 3 is more towards the back of the head. So we've got central front, central middle, and central parietal. And then we've got left, it'll look a bit backwards on the video, but we've got left peripheral and right peripheral. So one of the things that is going to be very useful for you as we are talking through these protocols is thinking about location of the LEDs and how we are combining those into possible approximate networks for impact, more sophisticated impact. Okay, let's go to our next visual. Okay, so what I did was put together a little bit of a support guide for how to think about protocol design in the Vielight world in general, and specific to the Neuro Pro 2 device. One of the important things to consider when you are either choosing protocols that have already been designed for you, or maybe assembling together some of your own ideas, is how we are going to choose locations and we are going to choose frequencies. So the 2 big choices are going to be how many LEDs, where are they located that we've decided to select, but then also what do we wish to pulse them at? So there are some steady state benefits to even just the 810 nanometer range at which the LED automatically emanates information, right? However, if we also choose to take that 810 nanometer LED and potentially pulse it at faster or slower frequencies, we are adding additional information in to recruit the brain's participation and engagement in potentially learning and creating more adaptive strategies. So this is a summary of some brief considerations for how you can think about why you might want to choose specific LEDs and why you might want to choose specific frequency ranges. As you will notice, we've got some lines and squares, and we have a little bit of text. As we are thinking through different frequency ranges, there's a lot of research, published research and literature around what types of brain function we associate with different frequency bands in the EEG. So in electroencephalography land, we think about brain waves in slower or faster categories. So for example, delta and theta are slower waves, and they have particular tasking states we associate with them. Gammas and betas are faster frequencies, and they also have certain jobs that they tend to be associated with. Alpha is the frequency range in the middle of fast and slow, and we think about alpha as the state you hang out in where you have the greatest flexibility. So a healthy functional brain is going to speed up into engaged, faster frequencies to do complex processing and tasking, to pay attention to things, to do maybe some more of the sophisticated multitasking that we associate with, say, peak performance and really cognitively oriented jobs. The slower frequencies, deltas and thetas, we slow down into those frequencies to do things like repair, consolidation, nutritional support in the actual physiological tasking of taking care of your brain. And then if if it is time at the end of the day for you to relax down into slower state so that you can consider going to sleep, you are resting, you are no longer being as focused and engaged. If you're having trouble slowing down and relaxing into those states, then you will not be able to regenerate, repair, and consolidate in the ways that we would prefer, that allows for sustainable, ongoing engagement during your days. If you spend too much time in those slower states and you cannot speed up into betas and gammas to do more maybe performance-oriented or even just daily tasks of living, then that's not helpful as well. So part of the reason that we look at alpha, and we've even started in many of our devices with an alpha option, is because you essentially speed up into betas and gammas and you slow down into deltas and thetas, you go through alpha. So having a healthy presence in alpha, spending a good amount of time in alpha, means that you've got that state flexibility to engage when required, and then to slow down when there's nothing in your immediate environment requiring that level of engagement and energy expenditure. So alpha is very critical for that. You will also know, if you've got some experience with Vielight tech, that the other primary option we tend to put out there alongside the alpha is a gamma option. Because for many people, sustaining complex processing with a certain amount of multitasking and processing speed and networking, having that higher level capability is frequently associated with being able to hang out in the gamma state with some persistence. So we want some state persistence. You want to be able to stay in slow when you need to, and you want to be able to stay in fast when you need to, but you also want to be able to shift out of those states when appropriate. So state flexibility and state persistence are some ways to think about where is it that I'm having trouble getting into and where is it I'm having trouble getting out of. So when you were looking at this infographic with me, and then when we go through the protocols, each of the protocols will represent some presence of most of these tasking states. because we want to give you some options to be able to hang out more in states where you're having trouble persisting, and then potentially to be more flexible and shift into the other states if you are persisting with a lot of enthusiasm, but maybe a little bit less flexibility. Okay, now that we've covered a brief overview of thinking through the different EEG breakout bands and task association, let's take a moment to look at more about LED location. So we have done a very gentle association infographic for you to think about the brain in some categories, in some geographical categories. So you will notice that, for example, we've got a purple line, two purple lines around most of the frontal LEDs. And so when we're thinking about the frontal lobe of the brain and what it's in charge of, what are the LEDs in the NeuroPro2 that might most closely impact the frontal cortex of the brain? When we think about maybe that parietal cortex, what are the LEDs placed in the MP2, the NeuroPro2, that might most directly impact parietal lobe function, right? The other thing for us to consider too is there are local, regional behaviors, and then there are also network behaviors in your brain. So as we potentially group some of the LEDs together, we're thinking about what are they doing right there at that location of the brain underneath each individual LED, but what happens when you actually group them together into sets. So for example, the LEDs running right down that midline, the central C1, 2, and 3, you can see here it's associated with this little blue description. These are pretty critical hubs that connect all four quadrants of the brain. So we've got the two hemispheres left and right, but we've also got that kind of frontal section of the brain, and then the parietal to occipital lobe. And so if you think about the brain almost in four quadrants with that central sulcus in the middle, then we need a way to be able to potentially span all four quadrants of the brain. And in some ways, those three, corpus callosum, anterior cingulate down at the bottom, these three across down the midline really help to pull together all four quadrants. So however you are grouping things together, you've got some hub applications, some hub capabilities that allow for you to think through how you want to select things. Now, the reason they've been broken out into smaller subsections is because when you are considering how much near infrared dosing that you would like to do, there's a few ways to think about that. One is how long you run the NeuroPro2 for, like how long actually is your session. But then another way to think about that is how many LEDs have you asked to participate in the session. So the more LEDs, the more near infrared potential impact you get. So if you are someone who would like a little bit less power, you can potentially modulate how much power you're asking for in the power settings, but you can also modulate your power by how many LEDs you choose at a time to run in the session. So if you are thinking you might want to choose fewer LEDs, an infographic like this might help you decide which are the LEDs that are most relevant to your considerations for the priority functions you would like to see changes in. Okay. Pause. Do you guys have any questions or anything you'd like for me to explain better or elaborate on so far?
I think that was a really good overview, and I'm just excited to see how this then turns into protocols.
Okay. So, how does thinking about the different brainwave frequencies and what they're potentially associated with, and then thinking about the geographical locations of the different LEDs transcranially and intranasally, how does putting those together turn into protocols? Okay, let's look at the first of our 5 protocol options that are included and do a little bit of a walkthrough, how it's put together, what we think it's going to help you with, and maybe why we did it that way. Okay, our first protocol that you are going to have available to you in the software is our relax and recover protocol. When I was assembling this, I was thinking through a couple of things. So the first thing I would love for you to pay attention to is that we are also introducing the concept of protocol cascades. So what that means is that previously we have leaned into the idea of maybe picking some specific locations in some specific frequencies and running a session primarily built around stable locations in a particular frequency selection. The idea of a protocol cascade is to do a couple of things. One, it is to create almost an experience or a model of a series of behaviors we would like to allow for your brain to both observe and engage with. And the reason we're doing this is I am imitating and reflecting the organic ways that the brain potentially shifts through different frequencies across different locations. So I'm thinking about wider network propagation effects, and I'm thinking about what does the brain naturally do that turns into states that you would like to feel or experience or be able to stay in for productivity purposes. How does the brain actually get you into alpha? Where are the alpha generators physically in the cortex or maybe even subcortically? And how do we teach the brain how to generate an alpha behavior, but also to think about it in a network, a wider network potential application, right? So with something like relax and recover, it actually has 5 stages where we're doing 5 different things that is imitating the natural movement the brain would engage in to produce what I would think is a more relaxed state that allows for some repair and some recovery, right? And some healing, maybe. Okay, you will notice in the first stage, all of the LEDs across the entire NeuroPro 2 device are illuminated. That means they are all engaged in this first protocol stage. We've got about 2 minutes of what I am calling a broad sweep. A broad sweep means that we are looking at a range of frequencies that starts off fairly low and sweeps up maybe 100, maybe 1,000. There's actually quite a broad range, and what we are doing is we are creating a little bit of a reset, right? We're almost doing a quick modeling of all the frequencies from, say, like 1 hertz to 100 hertz or 1 hertz to 300 hertz. We're essentially creating almost like a sweep where we are doing a general reset of all the frequencies the brain could potentially be introduced to in the rest of the protocol. The intention behind this is to help interrupt and shift the brain out of some potential state persistences, some habits it might be engaging in throughout your day, where it just stays in particular frequency ranges and it doesn't flex as easily. So a broad sweep, you'll see a broad sweep at a couple of the protocol intros. A broad sweep helps to introduce some more flexibility right at the beginning. So it's easier for the brain to then shift into the states we are hoping it will end up in with the gentle nudges from these protocols. So we do a nice little broad sweep on the beginning, and then you'll notice that the next stage is 4 minutes of limbic thalpa. Now, at this stage, what I'm going to do is take you temporarily to our glossary page, because as I'm explaining the protocols, when you are yourself looking through this expanded little support guide, take you down to page page 5. If it stays page 5, I might add a few things. We'll see how it goes. You can scroll down till you find the glossary page. One of the things that's going to be helpful is understanding the description terms in the protocols. So for example, when I say limbic in some of the protocol sequences, what I mean is I am taking the 2 intranasal applicators and that occipital placement LED, and the three of them are the only LEDs that will be activated in any sequence I'm referring to as limbic. The reason for this is that combining that intranasal and that base of the skull occipital LED placement, after having done a year or two of looking at just that combination of an intranasal potentially to base of the skull placement, we are observing some cortical to subcortical circuitry movement that I think really helps to lay the groundwork for some of that subcortical impact that we would like to see. So we're looking for changes in the bottom of the brain there that really allow for a foundation for more cortical layered behavior. So anytime you see limbic, it's going to be just these three. And I'm hoping to jumpstart a little bit of that subcortical response to help create some more cortical layered responses. Okay, so we are stage 2 of our relax and recover protocol. So we've got 4 minutes of limbic, just these 3 LEDs, alpha. Alpha, you say? Well, what does that mean? Remember, you've got a breakdown here that's going to tell you what the frequency ranges is for any of these terms. So that little 6 to 9 hertz range, we're easing up. Remember, bottom of the brain, we are easing up some slow wave foundation up into that alpha range. We really want to see that work get done, right? So you will notice next, we've got a full NeuroPro 2 cap alpha sweep. 3 minutes of just full head intranasal alpha everything. Okay. And then, then the real fun begins, because one of the things that we are really trying to think through with these protocols, we were trying to do something to very much model recruit engagement, inform the brain, support the brain as it learns behaviors. This chiastic alpha component is about really connecting those sort of almost inferior frontal cortical activation, that direct impact that we have through the sinus cavity where there's no skull bone, really preventing the propagation of that light as close to that, membrane potential as we can. So we're really looking for that frontal impact. And then we're saying, how can we chiastically create an effect that takes everything around that periphery and really joins it together, right? Because one of the things we know is that we've got a lot of alpha generators happening in the hypothalamic regions. So the hypothalamic nuclei that really help to gate arousal and engagement, we're gonna inhibit all that slow wave activity so you can focus on stuff. Now we're gonna relax so that you can recruit a lot of slow wave activity up and then do things like nutritionally support and repair your cortical regions. Well, now we're gonna gate. The thalamic-cortical oscillation is really critical for that state flexibility and shift. So we are looking at that here with this arrangement. And then after really asking for some state flexibility or some foundational alpha build, we take that same limbic consolidation capability and we go, okay, let's go right back down to the bottom and really hammer in. Let's integrate all the alpha work together. So the main intention of relax and recover is helping your brain to hit the points that neurophysiologically we observe in brains when they are downshifting into that relax and recover state. Pause. Questions, more elaboration? How you guys doing?
Yeah, Penny Jean. So that was really cool. And I have a question.
Yes.
So the way I kind of see these protocols, it's like you kind of gradually ramp up and you kind of gradually ramp down. So I'm seeing you have like the limbic alpha and then you have the gentle short alpha sweep. So why is it that you go from the limbic alpha, which is just targeting those limbic areas, to then the full brain back to just targeted areas? So I was just wondering if you can explain that part again.
Yes. So why are we going all the LEDs, back to just some of the LEDs, back to all the LEDs, back to, yeah. So why would I potentially choose a back and forth as opposed to just a gradient up or a gradient down?
Yeah.
That's a great question. Okay, so part of the decision to do like a full alpha bit right in the middle is almost to a degree mimicking that broad sweep behavior. For example, uh, Salfa is us creating just a foundational call for attention, right? Because I'm not trying to drop you fully into theta on this one. I still want
Hmm.
some flexibility in there. But uh, what I want to do right out the gate is to kind of almost jumpstart that. So you've got two places where you really generate a lot. There's like a lot of alpha propagators, right? Or alpha generators, sorry. There's two places where there's a lot of alpha generators. That thalamic nuclei, that region that I discussed, but also we've got some parietal generators of alpha that we often associate a little bit more with maybe cognitive flexibility. And so I wanted to be able to grab both what we can do with the potential higher cortical alpha generators at the same, it's almost like jumping the whole battery at once.
Hmm.
You'll notice that this stage is only 3 minutes. So again, like we've got a 2 minute broad sweep, a 3 minute sweep. So the idea is creating um they're like attention getters, right?
Hmm.
So whole brain means I would like for everybody who creates alpha, I want all the alpha generators, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, all of you wake up and pay attention. So that means then when we go over and do more concentrated alpha recruitment for more stretches of time, that means potentially I've got more alpha to work with to then concentrate down into a pattern.
Makes perfect sense.
Excellent.
Penny, thank you, Penny Jean. I have two questions. So question number one would be if you could explain about the networks. You mentioned about different networks, and then maybe if there is any particular network on the brain that this is activated. And my other question is regarding, let's say, muscle cramp or any tension that I have. If I'm an athletic person, do you think tuning into this protocol will actually help me recover?
Okay. The network question might be a little bit that might be so maybe you could is there a more specific network inquiry you have, or is it just talk about all the networks related to alpha?
No, I mean, if there is any correlation between the brain networks that you mentioned in the beginning to any of those protocols, if there is any correlation that you could talk about that, that would be perfect.
Sure. Okay. So we'll start with the muscle tension one and then maybe spend just a minute or two scrolling back and forth and making some more solid correlations. Okay. So Naz is asking, restate your muscle tension question.
My question is regarding muscle tension or muscle cramping. If I am an athletic person and I would like to recover fast, would you think this is the protocol that I can tune in?
I think for athletes and peak performers who are often required to stay very engaged to perform, this is an excellent recovery protocol. And here's why I think that. Um, we have some other protocols around the concept of focus and flow. And I think we often think about flow, right, as the main state that we want athletes to be in. So we either want them very focused and engaged, or we want them a bit in a flow state. But both focus and flow require a lot of fast frequency activity to hit those peak performance benchmarks. In performance mode, we are very engaged and we tend to usually expend a lot of energy, even when we're in a flow state that's energy efficient. It's still a lot of energy expenditure. You cannot repair and heal and really kind of nutritionally support physiologically the same circuits and actual brain tissue that you are using in an active sense, right? So you're either in an engagement activated state or you're in a relaxed repair, nutritional support, and rebuild state. So this is, I think, the relax and recover will help people who are having trouble maybe relaxing down into almost like an energy, let's say an energy preservation state, potentially even in between times where they need to perform. So sometimes we've got people who are performers of any type who stay on, even though they may have intermittent performance demands. So they might have to perform multiple times over a stretch, and they just kind of stay on, and then it's harder for them to shift down and conserve energy in between some of those demands. So I think something like this could really help with the in between. And I think something like this could also help for the post performance, where a lot of times when we expend a lot of energy, either cognitively or physically, there's a bit of a crash afterwards. And people feel that physically as well as emotionally. And so I think something like this helps to ease people through that post expenditure period with a little bit more ease. Okay, now you will notice I have a couple of different arrangements of LEDs. How would these potentially map to the infograph? Our little summary infograph that helps us understand what might be affected. So if we scroll back up and we look over here on the left, you will notice that our sort of flamingo colored limbic LEDs, we've got a nasal left, a nasal right, and then that very last central right along the base. You guys saw those images. I am thinking when I am including these or using these, I'm thinking very much about kind of that connection between the anterior cingulate, kind of at the, right below that front. So I'm thinking about that sort of inferior frontal cortex, the anterior cingulate, some of the basal ganglia, and then I'm thinking some of that cerebellum. So when we think about like the potential physical networks we're trying to recruit, the cerebellum, that bottom, like right at the top of your brainstem, that cerebellar area in the back of your head does a lot for initiating motor movement, thinking about orienting in space, essentially kind of connecting your brain with the rest of your body right there, kind of at the base of your skull and your spine. That's the circuit board of your body. So when we think about that C4 location, there's a lot of core brain body connections that are really potentially impacted by anything that we do there. And then when we think about those intranasal applicators and that inferior frontal cortical impact we can potentially get from those, and we pair up, there are some critical loops, subcortical loops between the anterior cingulate, the basal ganglia, the cerebellum, right? And then how are we going to translate some of that subcortical looping into cortical effect? So this is us trying to grab or impact or recruit a subcortical circuit and then say, how do you connect to a subcortical to cortical circuit and impact upwards, right? So that anterior cingulate, that cingulate in the brain, kind of what we're thinking, if you take right C1, C2, C3, and you drill straight down, we've got your cortical regions, and then underneath them, that cingulate kind of modulates between subcortical and cortical. So we've got anterior part, the front, and the bit in the front. We've got sort of that central cingulate, right? And then we've got the posterior cingulate. What's really delightful about thinking through cingulate behavior is that, for example, the cingulate bit in the front, the anterior, it really creates that. Here's what it does. The cingulate says what's happening subcortically, what's happening in the bottom of the brain that's very critical. And then it checks in with the cortical regions and says, what do you want to do with this? So for example, your basal ganglia, those subcortical regions at the bottom of your brain, say your amygdala, those are the very immediately reactive to your environment bits of your brain, right? So they do things like, I noticed there was noises. oh, there's potentially danger. Oh, something changed in the environment. Let's pay attention. So they are generating pay attention signals, right? Your anterior cingulate goes, okay, subcortical circuits are looking a little excited. Hey, frontal cortex, the executive function part of the brain that does inhibition or decision making or prioritization. How much do you want to prioritize stuff happening here at the bottom of the brain? And so the inferior frontal cortex or the frontal cortical region says, you know what, I'm not that worried about this, or yeah, let's escalate that one. And so what happens is the anterior cingulate is able to kind of do a quick check-in with the frontal cortex. It doesn't have to involve the entire cortical processing unit, which takes a little bit longer, right? Like the posterior cingulate can check in with, say, the parietal cortex about some things, right? And the central cingulate checks in with the sensory motor cortex. So we've got these quick little shortcuts between subcortical and cortical that really allow for, I would frame, processing speed. Because the two things that we can potentially break the brain out into so far as what might impact function is going to be state flexibility and processing speed. What do we need to cobble together to do some tasks network-wise, but also how quickly can we get them done? The more of the brain that you ask to do something at a time, sometimes the more time it takes it, right? To kind of get everybody in sync and in gear. So synchronized network behavior, the more synchronized everybody can be, the quicker things can happen. But the more synchronized, the more everybody's doing something at the same time, the less independent flexibility can happen. So there's really some payoffs either way. So this is why you will see me going back and forth a little bit between kind of total cortical synchrony behavior and some more localized independent network behavior. How was that?
That was
Okay.
great.
Okay, you guys are such a great audience. All right, so then what I would love to do is take you through the remaining 4 protocols, give you a little overview. Our next protocol, emotional balance, one of the things that really helps us steady our states is feeling that we can rely on incoming sensory inputs, that the information coming in is accurate and reliable, that we feel like we can process it with accuracy, and then we can respond in ways that are going to help keep us safe, potentially get our needs met, right? So one of the things that thinking about just how the brain orients itself in space, right? Like those couple of colliculi, the superior and inferior colliculi at the very bottom of the brain that orient your whole attention in space. That inferior colliculus is recruited by inputs from your auditory cortex. So it's the stuff that you hear. Most of us are pretty sensitive, with some obvious caveats for our hearing impaired family. Most of us are fairly sensitive to changes in auditory input. Then the superior colliculus is recruited by inputs from the visual cortex, right? So we've got visual information usually coming in and auditory information usually coming in. Some people have less sensitive auditory or visual inputs. Some people have more sensitive auditory and visual inputs. So everybody's brain is going to cobble together some type of prioritization strategies based on development through childhood and adolescence and into adulthood, right? And those strategies are really impacted by things like, I don't know, did you need glasses when you were a kid? Did you have any hearing impairments in your developmental stages? How reliable are your visual and auditory inputs even to date, right? And once we start maybe layering in smell, like the olfactory components of your brain, we start layering vibration or sensation, sensitivity to heat or cold. As we start pulling all those sensory inputs together, they really become a lot of information that your central nervous system is trying to take in, process, and then essentially create meaning and prioritization out of. So being able to think all the way down to the bottom of your brain, what does your orientation, prioritization strategies, what have they kind of independently, individually, uniquely cobbled together for you? And what is working and what is not working? So for some people, there's not always really synchronized integration between maybe what we're doing cognitively and emotionally up here, and then potentially what we're doing sensory input wise more subcortically, right? And so the idea of being able to feel connected to, safe in your body, grounded in your body, is pretty fundamental, I think, for many people who need to establish a certain baseline level of okayness before they can go on and do some higher level functions. Not everybody has structured for themselves a reliable sense of physical safety. And so, how do we potentially support even just that foundational sense of grounded, centered safety? Well, part of how we do that is helping that central nervous system to feel like it can rely on the information coming in, that it is accurate and that it is capable of responding with an appropriate amount of arousal in an appropriate set of behaviors to protect yourself and to potentially get needs met, right? So we really need a lot of cooperation and synchronization between some cortical circuits and some subcortical circuits for that to happen. Now you will notice the first 3 stages of this protocol is us hanging out down in the theta ranges in those kind of lower placements where we're hoping to coax your brain into a sense, like a sort of a theta range sense of feeling very connected physically to your body. But also sometimes when you pull people into that theta state, if you remember, the slower ranges, deltas and thetas, if you remember, delta and theta are more internally oriented physiological tasking and not so much paying attention to what's going on outside of you. Betas and gammas are more paying attention to what's going outside of you, your external environment. Deltas and theta states are more about internal environment, right? So for some people, pulling them down into theta really helps connect that internal environment. But if we just hung out in theta, then not everyone is easily able to then integrate the external scanning, the external kind of visual auditory scanning behaviors that you need to say, here's me paying attention to what's happening inside, but I am also simultaneously still engaging in enough scanning behavior that I can feel my external environment is also safe. You need both. You need an internal sense of safety and an external environmental sense of safety. So we've got some nice theta right at the beginning to help you really kind of connect physically with your body, but then we gently scooch you up through some of the beta ranges. Now, we're not going all the way up into fast betas. Remember our ranges here, right? We don't take you past mid beta. These faster betas and gammas are really more about that abstract, complex processing, right? Where you're doing a lot of, thinking about things like, is God real? Who likes me or doesn't like me? Things that are going to happen in the future that I kind of can't control. Well, yeah, those are really important things to think about. But if you are kind of hanging out in existential angst mode all the time, it's much harder to focus on daily tasks of living, right? What am I going to wear today? Which child do I need to pick up first? So there are some daily tasks of living that we really more get done hanging out in sort of the low beta, mid beta ranges, right? Before we go out to a little more abstract existential action. And so this emotional balance protocol lays a nice data foundation to connect to your body, but then it takes you, you'll notice this is an 11-minute sweep, meaning we're going from alpha up into some mid beta ranges so that we can leave you, having that awareness of your sensory environment, but we have laid a nice connected to your body foundation to then, as you are scanning your external environment, connect up those circuits so that you're able to do both with a certain amount of synchronized accuracy. Okay, how you guys feeling about this one? Any questions?
This is very interesting, Penny Jean. So I believe the three limbic theta that you have, each of them is 2 minutes. They're different. They're doing different tasks. Um, and then moving into that 11 minutes sitting, as you said, between alpha and mid beta. What are the symptoms that I feel today? Like if I feel agitated today, um, like what are those symptoms that I want to tune into that emotional balance? Let's say I pick up my Neuro Pro 2 today, and why would I want to tune into that emotional balance?
Maybe a good way to frame this is, why would I choose emotional balance over relax and recover? Or why would I choose relax and recover over emotional balance? Okay, here is probably the simplest way to think about it. People who are having maybe more physical manifestations of stress, easy startle reflex, much more restlessness, just there's way more sensory motor things happening, maybe even feeling somewhat disconnected from their body, right? I would say emotional balance would be where I would start with physical symptoms of stress and anxiety. Whereas relax and recover, well, I think also could be helpful for those symptoms. I'm thinking of this a little bit more as mental stress, right? So there are a lot of ways that we create muscle tension in our bodies. So this is why I'm saying I think this could also help with sensory motor symptoms, but this is more tackling what are the mental states we get ourselves into and really kind of can't shift out of. So I would say maybe more emotional cognitive, I'd probably go for relax and recover. And for more very clear kind of somatic body symptoms, I'd probably choose emotional balance to start. Okay, we've got just a few more. Focus. Okay, what I really like about focus is pretty much a beta situation. I think sometimes betas get a little bit of a bad rap, right? Because it is true, if you stay too much in the beta ranges too long across too many brain areas, you end up a little bit pegged out. And it's not a sustainable state. So a lot of people will burn, 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 and then crash really hard, right? And so there are some people who probably wouldn't benefit as much from a beta-centric protocol because they already are besties with their betas, and they might need something that allows for them to shift out of that state. However, there are some people who have more trouble engaging in sustaining a focused series of behaviors that allow for productivity, right? So you will notice this one is just all the LEDs all the time. This is a pretty serious beta protocol. We're really trying to get you into those productive states. But you'll notice, even though I did like a nice broad sweep at the beginning to kind of help with that, that sort of jump start, this is probably most useful for people that find themselves having a lot of difficulty engaging and sustaining engagement, right? So low energy, low fatigue, just real trouble kind of being able to think through stuff, do planning, just initiate and even complete tasks. I think this is going to be a good one for people experiencing that, because you'll notice we do like a nice broad sweep to help kind of introduce that there's more happening in the brain besides maybe theta, just reminding the brain that about the possibilities. And then we go for a mid beta sweep, and we hang out for 11 minutes in high beta. Like we're like, let's focus here, buddy. But you will notice that at the end, the last few minutes is a low beta sweep. Now, the reason for that is, even if you do need a bit of a jump start, not everybody functions as adaptively just persistently making fast beta, high beta, right? What I love about that low beta range is that it's right on top of alpha, right? Like if we think about where it is, We're making alpha, and then we ease up into low beta, where we really start to engage, and then we kind of engage more and more, right, as we go along. That low beta is probably like that apex frequency range for, in some ways, engaged, but still stay flexible. So what I wanted to do is give like just a nice, steady beta experience, but still at the end, leave you with with the capability to still adapt state, right? So that you're not left in pegged out high beta. Your brain has been reminded that beta is a thing. It has been modeled what productive beta behavior could look like. But we're not leaving you fully pegged out, and here's why. One of the things I love about the beta states is the local independence. Deltas and thetas, those slower waves, even up into alpha, they're very kind of wide range synchronizing behaviors, right? Because it makes a lot more sense trying to neurophysiologically support or nutritionally support or propagate neurotransmitters. It makes a lot more sense for everybody to be on the same radio channel, so you can just create a lot of effects across the whole brain. Potentially, there's a lot of synchrony, widespread synchrony happening in the slower states. But what that means is that the individual independent behaviors that are unique to each region are not as accessible. When you start edging up into, like when you start easing up into those beta ranges, the beta is where you really see those independent local functions shine. So beta is that kind of independent inhibitory as in like do multiple different things, not stop. But complex inhibition is each location doing its own thing and not not getting dragged along with everybody else. So what's delightful about a beta protocol is it creates a lot of that independent, complex activity that we associate with higher level capabilities, right? However, not everybody can really ease back out of that kind of hot state. So we also leave you in that low beta range so that just in case being pegged out is hard. If you're having trouble shifting back and forth, you could get stuck either place potentially without enough flexible support. So we end in low beta just to not leave you too highly revved. Any questions about this one before I go to the next one?
This is very interesting. So the whole brain is actually engaged while doing all different sorts of beta, from mid to full, high, to low beta. My question is regarding focus. So if I have an exam, I'm a medical student, I have an exam, I have distracted thoughts. Would you think this focus protocol would be the useful one?
I think if you want kind of dedicated bursts of attention, this is probably for most people gonna be a good choice. The only reason you might consider flex instead of focus is that focus is it's very beta. And by that I mean, one of the things I love about the gamma states, so as you mentioned, this is full every LED we have, full brain, full everything. And the reason for that is I'm really trying to access all the potential little independent pockets of regional activity. No LED left behind, right? I'm really trying to get everything going that we can, right? However, if you are somebody who doesn't require much to get going, right? And you're someone who's already got a lot of maybe energy, but you were having a little bit more trouble corralling it, right? So this is a jump start for the battery, right? However, for someone who already has a lot of jump, they don't need much start, the flex protocol might actually be a better one. So say we've got students doing exams. We've got some students who have trouble just getting into gear at all, right? They're just distracted, unfocused, a little fuzzy. It's hard for them to, for people who are kind of stuck in slow and they need that upshift, I think focus is a good choice. But for people who are constantly going all of the time, and what they need maybe is more corralling in, right? A little bit more, I mean, maybe some narrowing of the focus, right? I would say flex is potentially a good option. There's a couple of things that flex does, though quite differently. So for example, you'll notice with the beta, I ended the protocol in a low beta. I didn't leave you out in that high state, right? Flex is a little intro sweep, a little bit of that foundational alpha to help with safe flexibility, and then it is just 11 straight minutes of gamma, and I do not ease you back into anything. So there are some people who really benefit from just the gamma options available across the Vielight devices, right? They really do well just hanging out gamma, because what gamma does. So again, everything I'm telling you is a little bit colloquial and simplified. There are many other ways we could be talking about this, but just for the context of us thinking it through together. If you think of the betas as creating all these little pockets of independent activity, gamma comes along and networks a lot of those regions together into various different networks that allow for more complex processing to occur, right? So we got to get everybody desynchronized a bit into their independent pockets, doing each of their local independent necessary things, but they still need to be networked together, right? To do some of these different complex tasks. So this alpha and gamma together is potentially more about the capacity to do that complex processing in a corralled way. So there are some people who honestly, their brains just go. There's a lot happening, but it's not maybe terribly organized, right? They're very engaged, but it's not very organized, and it's not a lot of prioritization. It's hard maybe to do sequencing. It's hard to really kind of make use of all that creative energy. It's kind of hard to pull that together, right? And so I think that the Flex protocol would benefit both people who have a lot of mental energy, who need to corral that for something potentially like an exam. But I think that the Flex protocol will also work very well for people who are looking to potentially get into that flow state. So there are some people who have trouble getting into the flow state from a slow direction. There are some people who have trouble getting into the flow state from a fast direction. I think Flex is the fast direction people, right? Let's corral you down into the flow state as opposed to let's jumpstart you up into the flow state. Okay, which is actually an excellent lead into our final and fifth protocol, enhance. So the idea of trying to put together what is happening in your body and what is happening in your brain, and how do we do that in a way that is both synchronous, like time synced up, but still has some state flexibility at both the local level, because we need local areas of the brain to be able to kind of shift back and forth between engage and relax, but we also need network flexibility. We need the brain to be able to take, local areas that are being kind of recruited or, unrecruited through different, we need to be able to take those, and we need for the networks to change between which areas we're recruiting together. Oh, the task has changed. Uncouple those, recruit a different set of local areas together to do a different task. Oh, now we're doing something else. Oh, now we're doing two things at once. We really need for there to be a certain amount of coordination of both synchrony and asynchrony at the local and the network level for all these things to come together, to have someone who can both cognitively, like mentally and physically, perform with a lot of variable demand. So the enhanced protocol, you will notice, has some theta elements. That's that foundation body up, kind of trying to connect, right? Cortical and the rest of the central nervous system. But then you'll notice we get here in the middle, and we are introducing a new idea, cross frequency. And you'll notice the two frequencies that we are combining or cross-frequency coupling is a theta range and a high gamma range. Now, let's talk about gamma and high gamma. The gamma range that we typically hang out in when we're thinking about like applications based on EEG research and publication and based on kind of a functional tasking a state that we associate with like cognitive capability, usually that gamma range is going to hang out somewhere in like sort of the 30 to 60 range, right? 40 hertz is the default gamma selection in a lot of our Vielight products. And so 40 hertz is a great like kind of choice to select kind of that spans, helps kind of hit that peak right in that whole range span. There's a lot we can really do with 40 hertz, yeah? As we start to level up into faster frequencies and actually ask the brain to spend more time in the even faster frequencies. I know there's a couple more protocols that are going to potentially be released that I think are coming from a colleague of ours, Sanjay. I think he's going to release a couple meditation-oriented options. One of the things that happens for people who are really interested in meditation and possibly that idea of really kind of expanding their connection to everything around them, going up into higher and higher frequencies is one of the things that we consider doing. We're really looking for that expansive effect, right? For some people, really hanging out in those higher gamma, faster frequency ranges can be, they can really help to expand that sense of feeling connected to things outside of us, that sense of being like things being bigger than we are, a sense of something greater. There's a lot of benefit that can come to us emotionally and even cognitively, kind of expanding out that sense of awareness, right? However, for you to really take that expansion, that enhancement of our kind of our awareness of what's going on, but to sustain it in ways that maybe feel, let's say, safe and beneficial. Some people get a little overstimulated sometimes when we go fast frequency. This is a design meant to create a foundational, stable connection. We want a sense of a connected back of groundedness, right? Even though we're ranging afar, we still want to have a little beacon, right? A little porch light left on for where we feel kind of connected to self and body. So theta, we know it is a good range for that. But we would really like to so see what's out there, yeah? So we start with just a little bit of theta grounding, and then we maintain some theta activity, right? While simultaneously, so the cross-frequency capability means that at some of these LEDs, a lot of these, all of these LEDs are going to pulse at a high gamma frequency. And some of these LEDs at the same time will also pulse in a theta range. So there's going to be some grounding effects that happen at the same time. I almost think of it as a little bit like a tether. So it allows you a lot of exploration range, but with a little bit of a safety rope, right? So doing this simultaneously does two things. It helps to tether that exploration experience, and it helps to fuel it. So theta is the frequency range in which we do thalamocortical recruitment, meaning that a lot of the actual physiological nutritional support that we receive, like we eat food, it breaks down in our bodies, it gets recruited up through the central nervous system. At some point, it has to hit the brain. We need to use that fuel. We're converting it into proteins, amino acids, glucose, all the things we actually need to run your brain, the fuel. So it hits the bottom of your brain first because that's all the stuff that you need to stay alive, breathing, heart rate, all that good stuff, right? However, for you to then recruit it up into your cortex to do all the complex processing and fancier brain behaviors, the thalamocortical, remember we talked about that? The thalamocortical is that process in which we go, okay, time to recruit stuff up into the cortex for use. Well, a lot of the thalamocortical recruitment happens in those theta to slow alpha ranges. So sometimes in the literature, you will see people say things like, there's too much theta in the frontal lobe, so this person can't focus. We need to speed them up into betas and gammas so they can have focus. Yes. However, when you see too much theta happening in, especially like say maybe the cortical, the frontal part of your brain, usually that is a resourcing concern. The frontal cortex is going, I'm really trying to resource something, right? Things have occurred. Maybe it's a little brain injury. Maybe there was some illness. Something happened. And the frontal cortex is like, we need resourcing. We're trying to repair. We're trying to do some stuff up here. And so you'll see all that theta happen, right? But as your central nervous system is trying to resource and repair, you can't resource and repair and then do like complex functioning at the same time, right? You can't complex task while you're resourcing and repairing. Like, listen, you can eat lunch while you drive, but everyone's going to agree that is not an optimal combination of behaviors. You either want to eat lunch or you want to drive. And that way you can do either one of them with full attention. Now, theta is the frequency in which we do a lot of that support resourcing, right? We need that. We do need theta up in the cortex, but we don't need constant, persistent, inflexible theta. But there are some very interesting pairings, some cross-frequency couplings, where you will see some synchronized activity between different frequencies where they come together and they do stuff at the same time to further enhance what they're able to do. And theta and gamma have a special little relationship where gamma's like, time to explore. And theta's like, all right, well, I'm going to tether all that exploration and I'm also going to fuel it. There's almost like a little tesseract cross-frequency synchrony that happens where theta helps to fuel and tether the exploration so that you can have experiences that aren't overwhelming or overstimulating. And so this is what we are mimicking with this cross-frequency theta high gamma. We're like, all right, let's go high gamma. Let's tether, let's fuel, and then at the last stage, let's consolidate, let's integrate with that alpha so that whatever it is that you just experienced potentially, you can integrate and feel grounded and capable of maybe even more insight and intuition and new thoughts and ideas, right? Okay.
That's amazing. So for the enhanced protocol, you mentioned about injuries, if I had any prior injuries.
Mhm.
Would that be the choice that I would like to tune into enhance?
So you will notice in the description, I talk about attention and processing speed, right? This idea of being able to kind of do a lot of things and how you pay attention and how all that works. And you'll notice though, I also talk about motor movement and balance.
Mhm.
Now, there are a variety of ways for us to think about what is happening in the brain when we have trouble, like somatically, with motor initiation or inhibition, with balance, potentially with some, just types of motor disorders that we develop as we age, but also that we potentially experience as a result of illnesses and or injury. So when I am thinking about like potentially like a whiplash brain injury and how that can create those long white matter tract shearing effects where the front part of the brain and the back part of the brain are not as easily cooperating and synchronizing together to do some network stuff. So I'm thinking about if you guys like look at the cross frequency theta high gamma stage in the middle, you will notice we've got full frontal, full posterior, and that little connector in the middle, right? I am thinking about how does it like this is almost like the culmination of everything we said in the other protocols. This idea of how do we potentially think about prioritization, orientation, feeling connected to your body? How do we also think about complex and attention and processing speed? How do we pull all of that together, right? How do we fuel it? So all of that is coming together in this potentially as an an additional option. But why does the body have trouble coordinating with like, say, cortical to like, so let's say central maybe to peripheral. Yeah. Why does peripheral and central sometimes have disconnects? So this is thinking through like, what are the actual cortical networks to the subcortical that not only affect a sense of self and body, but also affect how the brain communicates to the peripheral limbs of the body, and how does everything coordinate together? Can we help to support and sustain better network and cortical to subcortical circuitry that allows not just a sense of self, but also an engagement or activity oriented network capability, right? So I would say potentially after an injury or an illness, or even potentially as we age, and we start to lose a sense of maybe agency or control over ourselves. There are mental and emotional elements to that that are often exacerbated by the genuine physical experiences we have, where our bodies are not as reliable, maybe as they were before an incident or when we were younger. So we do not feel safe and we do not feel good if we don't think I can have my body do what I want it to do when I want it to do it. Like, that's not a good feeling for anybody. So the idea behind Enhance is to build on some of that, maybe some of that emotional balance, right? And the idea of being kind of connected and feeling like you can process what's happening, but also taking it to that next step of, can I help to support that further, not just the experiential, the emotional sense of like feeling what I'm feeling, but also can I maybe just reconnect or support the repair of some of that communication back out to my body with some more reliability.
Great. Thanks, Penny Jean. And I have a question for you as well. So I think you did a really excellent job at explaining the profile of people that would use these types of protocols. If I was a person that thinks I can benefit from multiple of these protocols, what's your recommendation to a customer of how they should kind of combine it, how they should space it out, when they should use different things? Just wondering your thoughts on that, because I can imagine these protocols will be very useful for people. They'll want to be trying these multiple times on different days, or what do you have to say about that?
Okay, so your question is two parts.
Yeah.
The first part is how do I identify my priorities as a user, right?
Yeah.
What is it that I'm most interested? So I'm always going to say, pick the thing you're most interested in working on and start there. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. And the other part of your question is, okay, now I've picked something to try. How do I kind of dose myself, right? Like, what's the best way for me to introduce it into my system and get the best effect? So first question is, how do I pick what I want? Now, part of the reason that we had this visual, this is the same visual a second time. Part of the reason that we have this visual here is for you to do almost like a quick and dirty, what is going on, right, in these different ranges or these different locations. Like, as you're scanning through here and you're thinking, what is it that's most important to me? This will allow you to see like what LEDs are being included in which protocols to consider like geographically, right? You've got the tasking states under the EEG to help you think like what are the areas of the brain in charge of that I might potentially want to affect? And what are the states or tasks that I would like to either be able to do better or manage better? So you could potentially start here with just this. Some people are going to want a slightly deeper dive, which is why we have made another graphic that also equates those same kind of physical breakouts with Brodmann areas. There's a lot of published literature on a functional breakout of Brodmann areas associated with different things that your brain does, right? And so in this expanded guide, which you will be able to access online, it will have clickable links. And each of these clickable links, so you'll say for example, the frontal regions, right? The ones we're associating with executive function and inhibition and working memory. All of these Brodmann areas are potentially the ones that could be impacted by LEDs here. So here's every one of these is a link directly to what is Brodmann 8 or say Brodmann 45. What is it that we think happens in that area of the brain? So you can also, if you want to do just a slightly deeper dive, this is a starting point for you to run through and say, like, why would I want to choose, like, what's happening in the protocol and why would I want to choose this one particularly? So you can use the quick and dirty summary, or you could potentially use some of these links and take a deeper look at some possible options. Okay, so that being said, when you were physically looking through the protocols, here is the simplest way to consider which one you want to pick. The descriptions all mention particular things that we think this protocol will help with, right? Remember we talked about the mental relaxation, potentially maybe versus the sensory, like the feeling of body versus maybe mental. Now, obviously I threw muscle tension in there, but that's muscle tension that comes from mental stress, right? Not from, so what I would suggest people do right out the gate is just scan the different descriptions because each of them have key terms in them. As you scan through, there's going to be a key term, maybe a couple that really pop out for you. Yeah. So each of these protocols could potentially help with a variety of different things. Like everybody's brain learns a little differently, right? So any of them could catalyze some unanticipated improvements, right? However, the specific key terms associated in the descriptions reflect what I understand the frequency bands and the chosen LED locations to really emphasize. So I would say go through, look at the key terms and grab the one that you think is reflecting what you are most interested in prioritizing. So everyone's going to say, okay, sure, but what if I scroll through and I want to do all of it?
Yep.
We all want to do all of it. Who doesn't? So then the question you ask yourself is, what is the thing that is most affecting my daily quality of life? What is the lived experience? Like, sure, I don't feel very safe a lot because I got stresses and anxieties, but part of the reason I have stresses and anxieties is because maybe I'm not performing as well at work or in school as I need to, and maybe I can't pay my bills if I don't have a job. So I could start with emotional grounding, or I could start with focus and get it done, right? You don't have to choose so much because second part of the question is let's say I pick a thing. Then what do? You are actually allowed to pick multiple things and kind of alternate between them. That is 100% fine. So what I would potentially suggest is say maybe relax and recover and emotional balance might be ones that you would do when you're trying to wind down, right? Whereas the focus, the flex, and potentially even the enhance are more when you were trying to wind up a little bit or maybe be more performance focused. So the first question you ask myself is, in my state flexibility concerns, am I trying to engage or am I trying to relax more? So maybe we start with what you think is an environment appropriate option. Yeah. Okay, I wouldn't necessarily do focus right before bed just because you want to do better on your video game. You probably could do better on your video game at 11 p.m. at night if you do focus, but you might not do so great with the sleeping. So, contextual decisions like that will help. And then how do you potentially dose it out? You will notice that each one of these they have a number of stages. And that means you're going to have like a total time. So for example, 11 plus 6 is going to be 17 minutes, right? Relax and recover is 24 minutes. So there is, the time ranges do reflect what I think should be a full experience, a full enclosed experience to get you where we want to get. But you are also allowed at any point that you are, sitting on one of the protocols and you start to feel either a little more tired or a little more wired, maybe a little overstimulated, a little bit emotional, right? You are allowed to simply pause the protocol at any stage that you would like, okay? There is nothing that says that you have to complete the full sequence, okay? So I have actually, in the testing of these protocols, I have actually had a few people who kind of get to a relaxed space earlier on in the alpha, or get to a grounded space like earlier on in the theta to alpha ranges. I've had people who literally say, okay, we've done this for about 8 minutes. I feel pretty good. I would like to stop here because I feel good. And we do, and that is fine, right? So part of it is you knowing you are allowed to stop the protocol, and knowing that you are allowed to pair protocols together. Now, obviously, when you're pairing them together, maybe you're running one protocol after another one, you're going to end up in the 35, 45 minute, 50-minute range, right? So not everyone is going to really tolerate that much. I wouldn't automatically recommend that. But if you've been using Vielight products for a while, you know your own kind of level of tolerance, and you're like, look, I get on that gamma and I do like an hour of gamma and it's fantastic. Okay, if you know that about yourself and you'd like to take, say, maybe the emotional balance, right? We're doing all that limbic theta and you want to then follow that up with some enhance, or vice versa, and you're like, I think two of these things, like I can't pick both of them together, you are absolutely allowed to do that. However, if you're going to pair them together at the same time and run an extended session, my recommendation is the first time or two you do that, give yourself plenty of space around that experiment.
Sure.
Right? To rest or consolidate or kind of see how you feel. So I think for the other thing maybe to consider as well, you'll notice that I use words like gentle and full. If we look at the glossary, gentle means the LEDs are at partial power, and full means that all the LEDs are at maximum power. Okay. So you will notice I actually combine some gentles and some fulls, right? So for example, if there's nothing in there, you can just assume everything is full. Like if I don't say one thing or the other, it's all just going full bore. However, if you're seeing a gentle and a full, that means there's a lower power. So you got 7 minutes of lower power, right? And then 16 minutes of full power. So there's also been a little bit of mediation in the designs in some of these where I am expecting, see these full betas, I am expecting, that full power for some people might be a little bit like this is a battery jumper, so we want what we can get. But I'm still, even on the front end, I'm modulating just a little bit, easing into that beta experience. So you can also take a look at you can also take a look at if any of them have gentle stages, how long the gentle or the full stages are, and do a little calculation too, like the level of power or intensity that might bring to the table. Okay, how often? We are still learning. We are still learning. It's still very much an individual tolerance paradigm. My recommendation is at the beginning when you're trying out the protocols, I probably wouldn't do more than one a day. I would allow yourself to try one and give yourself, I'd say, at least a good 12 to 24 hours to feel how it settles, because the two primary things, right, that indicate fatigue is we are anticipating fatigue effects for people, right? So if there's anything that is potentially associated with a possible impact or a side effect, an effect, we are thinking fatigue effect categories. So the main fatigue effects are tired and wired. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're a little too tired and you don't have the resources that you need to inhibit, you're wired, right? can't focus, can't think, you're all over the place, can't sleep. That's still a fatigue effect, right? That's not too much energy. That's insufficient energy to appropriately regulate yourself, right? So too wired means you might have overdone it a little bit, and too tired means you might have overdone it a little bit. I think for some people initially, as they are trying these out, we would assume there's going to be a little bit of fatigue because we're asking the brain to do some complex things. We are kind of stimulating, right? That cellular energy production mechanism. So there's a few things happening simultaneously. We've got the 8 to 10 nanometer LED information. We got the different pulsing, and now we've got a sequence of things. We're asking your brain to do multiple things. There's a lot of things happening in these protocols that we think ultimately will be quite beneficial. But the first handful of times you're introducing like something like this into your system, it's like going to the gym. You don't work out for 3 hours the first time you go in 3 years, right? You ease into it. So this is the model that we're suggesting is pick a thing that seems like it could really meet an immediate priority need. Try it once. Give yourself some time to process like the level of fatigue you experience. If you don't notice any fatigue effects, no tired or wired, there's also the other question of, well, I didn't notice anything. Did it even do anything? Well, great question. Here's what we know. You put LEDs, you put near infrared light on, especially you're using that double barrel nasal, right? You put this on, it will do things. Things are going to physiologically occur. What we are trying to do is organize and make meaningful and maybe a little more sophisticated the information that we are giving your brain to work with. We know stuff's going to happen. We're trying to give just a little more framework around how your brain can use the effects. Yeah. So, not everyone's going to immediately notice physical sensations or a cognitive difference, right? So for some people who may be very energetically depleted, there may not be much of a sensory sensation change or even much noticing in the first handful of sessions difference because the fuel simply isn't there to be used for a lot of perceptual awareness change. So there are some people who I see if you do this 5 or 6 times and you're like, I don't notice absolutely anything any of the times I'm doing this during or in the 24 or 48 hours after, then I would recommend that you potentially evaluate what you have available resource-wise to actually engage with the process of doing the near-infrared light therapy, right? Because if you're potentially not getting the physical food and nutrition into your body you need to fuel the engagement and potentially the learning and the neural infrastructure building and strategy adoption, if that's not even there in the first place to engage with the process, it is unlikely you will see the results that we would anticipate with somebody who has a better fueled system. Yeah. So if you're noticing nothing, I'm like, maybe we need to evaluate a couple other things, right? Downstream, upstream. Maybe we need to evaluate a few things upstream, right? That are making it harder for you to receive and engage with in a beneficial way.
Perfect. I also sometimes tell our customer that keep a daily diary or a weekly diary handy. So when you heal, you forget about that. You don't know where you're coming from. And then after maybe a couple of weeks of doing photobiomodulation, then you track yourself down today. And then after a couple of weeks, you would actually notice maybe some enhancement. That's very interesting, Penny Jean.
Absolutely. We are discussing putting together maybe a tracking tool template that people can potentially use if they would like to track their progress over time. So just a little template that says like, what protocol did you use? Here's a couple of questions you could rate for maybe fatigue levels. Did you notice this or that? So we're thinking through maybe the most efficient way to do that in the format that we could offer that in, just to support individuals in their method of tracking. However, you could do this any way you want. Get a cute little notebook and just write down what you did and what you noticed, and that suffices, right, for building a record. So yes, the more methodical you are, Naz is absolutely right. The new normal quickly becomes normal. And there are people who have ongoing, over the course of months or even a year or two, evolving benefits from using something like Vielight therapy. But because the new normal has just become normal, they have forgotten what it was like at the beginning. So you being able to establish a referential framework, a record, is going to also help you better understand how to best use the devices that you've got available.
Great. I think that is it. So thank you so much, Penny Jean, for explaining everything. That was extremely helpful, and I'm sure that many people will love to see this recording and learn from you in this recording.
Yeah, thanks everybody for their patience for this first run through of these new protocols. Like we've never done anything like this before, so we are all exploring together this new frontier.
That's amazing. I just wanted to add one note here. Penny Jean mentioned that one other protocol that we do have in our Neuro Pro 2, which is the protocol from Dr. Sanjay Manchanda. This is a meditation protocol. So in that, but the click of a button in the NeuroPro that you will see frequencies from 1 hertz go all the way up to 120 hertz. And there is time spans of 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes here and there between different frequencies. The total time of this protocol is 25 minutes. And as Penny Jean was describing, and I was learning a lot, what I learned is that it would expand your space in that meditate protocol and it would leave you at 120 hertz. So that is also something to explore for those of you who are interested to learn more. Penny Jean, thank you very much for this informative session. It was very, very educational, and I really appreciate your time and also the educational sessions you put together.
I appreciate your patience and moral support.